Hello, everybody. So I have a bit of a, uh, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's a complaint, it's a gripe, it's a sad, sad story to tell. So, years ago, when people used to be smart, they noticed a corresponding drop to atmospheric pressure when it got cold. Or at least they thought they did. So a bunch of different people did a bunch of different experiments. And it was found that as the temperature approached to be cold enough to freeze water, that the atmospheric pressure at sea level was about 32 pounds per square inch. And um, it was not an arbitrary number. They couldn't use zero because it was more than zero. It was 32. They couldn't use negative 100 because it wasn't negative 100. It was 32 pounds per square inch, at which pure water started freezing at sea level. They also found that if they were to raise the pressure, such as by by heating the water and keeping it at a contained level, that the pressure would rise to 212 pounds per square inch before the water started to boil. That's where the Fahrenheit scale came from. They could not arbitrarily use 100. I had some moron tell me today, oh, both the Fahrenheit scale and the Celsius scale uses arbitrary numbers. No, they don't. They couldn't use 100, 50, 60, 20 because the numbers were zero, or I'm sorry, 32 degrees or 32 pounds per square inch for freezing and 212 pounds per square inch for boiling. And then they just graduated that evenly on a scale and came up with degree markings. And thus came 32 degrees is freezing, 212 is boiling. Worked great for decades, then people started getting stupid. They forgot where the science came from. They didn't care. There was an archaic system that needed to be updated. So, hey, let's update it by arbitrarily choosing 0 for freezing and 100 for boiling. Arbitrarily, no measurements taken. They were easy numbers to remember. Let's plug them in and play. And we'll call this the Celsius scale. Absolutely zero science applied to it. People don't even know what the 32 and the 212 represented. They think, oh, those are arbitrary numbers. No, they're not arbitrary numbers. They're measurements of atmospheric pressure. It was a scientific process. Before the Fahrenheit scale had come up, there had been attempts to measure temperature before. I believe it was Galileo used an air pressure system based upon the convection of air. And it was not as accurate, not as easily contained. But it gave them an idea of when the temperatures were dropping and when storms might be coming in. But these systems were not arbitrary. All the numbers assigned to those systems represented something, usually atmospheric pressure or air pressure. That is what they measured. The Celsius scale, it stood on the shoulders of what great men before them did. And rather than to ask whether they should, they asked whether they could, and they did. And we have a serious dumbing down of people. Like, I have not found one single person in any of these threads that seem to have an inkling of where the Celsius scale came from. They think, oh, the Celsius scale is scientific and the Fahrenheit scale is not. They couldn't be more backwards if they tried. And this isn't just one or two, this is 100%. These people need to go watch the movie Idiocracy, and then they need to realize they are living the players of the stupid people, because they are dumb. They have zero clue about science. And then forget trying to talk about conciseness, because they don't even know what that word means. They haven't even looked it up. But to give you an idea, it is possible that they could have made the Celsius scale superior to the Fahrenheit scale, even without basing it upon science. They could have made the numbers minus 100 for freezing and positive 100 for boiling, or they could have made it 100 for freezing, 0 for freezing and 200 for boiling. The idea is leaving 200 degrees between the two. What does this do? It basically gives you a more concise scale, something that can be measured more precisely. But there's only 100 tick marks between freezing and boiling in the Celsius scale, whereas on the Fahrenheit scale there are 180 degrees of separation between those 2 points. This makes the Fahrenheit scale 9/5 more accurate than the Celsius scale. Almost twice, for those of you who are afraid of fractions and don't understand how to do fractions. 9/5 is only 1/5 away from being 10/5, and 10/5 is 2. 10 divided by, or 5, 10 divided by 5 is 2. And 10/5 would be twice as accurate. It's not quite twice as accurate, but almost twice as accurate as the Celsius scale. So I don't know how you get a whole bunch of people out there that seem to think that, oh, both scales are based on arbitrary numbers, when they're not arbitrary at all in the Fahrenheit scale. It was based on measurements of air pressure at sea level, taken at the time when water froze and boiled. Somebody else told me that Fahrenheit scale was not based upon the freezing and boiling points of water. Yes, it was. That is what all of it was based on beforehand. Its Celsius scale was based on nothing except for updating an archaic system by arbitrarily assigning 2 different numbers. That is what the Fahrenheit, that is what the Celsius scale is. It stole the science away from the Fahrenheit scale and said, we don't care how it's done, we're just going to assign 2 different numbers. They've lost the science. They don't understand science. And the numbers were arbitrary in the Celsius scale. In the Fahrenheit scale, it was a scientific measurement. It was not arbitrary. You could not use any other numbers other than 32 and 212. Now, that being said, I do realize that non-pure water and water at different various levels of altitude will boil and freeze faster and slower than 32 and 212. But the measurements that gave us the scale that we used for centuries and still use to this day, like it or not, was based upon pure water at sea level and their freezing and boiling points. Celsius was based on nothing. Nothing but laziness. Sorry, people. Those of you who tried to say, oh, I've never seen anybody so confidently wrong in my life. Well, maybe you ought to look in the mirror, because I'm not wrong. You are. And you're being overconfident about your level of stupidity. Really? My God, how stupid can people be?